I would like to call this special board meeting to order and to acknowledge that we are meeting this evening from many locations in unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. We thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting us and recognize their enduring presence on this land. Before we go to approval of the agenda, just a couple of reminders for trustees in terms of what we're dealing with tonight. Under our Code of Conduct policy, Section 4.30 states that the board shall consider only the findings in the final report when voting on the decision and sanction. And secondly, Section 4.33 of the Code 4.33 of the Code of Conduct policy indicates that the trustee who is the subject of the complaint is entitled to be present, but shall not participate in the deliberations, shall not be required to answer any questions, and may not vote on a resolution to determine whether or not there has been a breach or on the imposition of a sanction. With regard to any possible recusals, trustees must decide for themselves whether they have any reason to recuse themselves from participating in the deliberations and decision with regard to either complaint. And we do have legal counsel present this evening, Mr. Lynn Harnden and Mr. Richard Sinclair, to provide advice to the board if needed. So with that, we come to the motion to approve the agenda.
Excuse me, Chair. I have some procedural questions. Would now be the time or after we approve the agenda?
Let's approve the agenda and then we can deal with your procedural questions.
Thank you.
So do we have a motion to a mover of a motion to approve the agenda? Trustee Fisher, seconded by Trustee Campbell. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If not, I'll call the question then on the agenda as presented. All those in favor? And opposed? And there are none opposed. The motion is carried. Trustee Ellis, you had some procedural questions.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's clear in my mind. A recommendation will fail on a tie, same as in any board meeting?
No, that's not correct. I will ask Ms. Giroux to address the issue of voting on the recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Code of Conduct policy provides that any decision by the board requires 2/3 vote.
Thank you. If a recommendation does not come onto the floor, either by not being moved or not getting a second, what happens then?
Then there is no action that the board would be able to take.
Thank you. That covers my procedure questions.
Thank you very much. That brings us then to the first matter of action. Item 3.1 on our agenda, where we will be dealing with report 20-099 Code of Conduct breach determination with regard to trustee Lyra Evans. And I will ask the director to introduce the report, please.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. I will turn it to Executive Officer Giroux to take us through the report and the next steps.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. As the chair indicated, we have a board member code of conduct policy, and a complaint was filed alleging that trustee Lyra failed to uphold sections 3.18, 3.28, and 3.29 of the code. That complaint did go to a formal review process, and we retained an investigator, Mr. Andrew Tremaine, who's with us here this evening, to complete a report. Under the policy, the board is required to review the report of the investigator and not to undertake any independent investigation, and to make a finding as to whether or not there has been a breach of the code. If the board finds there has been a breach of the code, then the board makes a separate decision about whether or not a motion to censure is in order, and if censure is in order, what sanctions, if any, would be applied. But that's secondary to this particular decision. The first decision that's before you this evening is whether or not there was a breach of the code. We do have draft language in the recommendation on page 5 of 51 of the eScribe package for your reference. And the investigator is here to answer any questions you may have regarding the investigation process. And Mr. Harnden is here as well to answer any legal questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Giroux. So the floor is open. If there are questions, if someone wishes to put a motion forward, the opportunity is now before you. And we will be observing the usual board speaking time rules, which means that every speaker has up to 5 minutes for their questions. That's not counting the time for answers.
Excuse me, Chair, how long do we wait before we decide a motion isn't coming forward?
Madam Chair, my hand is up.
Yeah, I just saw Trustee Campbell's hand go up. Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the report. Thank you to Mr. Tremaine. Thank you to staff for preparing all this. In my mind, the matter is relatively clear. I really ascribe this fundamentally, effectively it goes to a certain extent, trust as to motivation. But I do see this fundamentally as a communications issue. And maybe there are lessons to be learned here for all of us in terms of tone and communication strategy to the general public. However, in terms of a code of conduct complaint, I find this, I'm not going to say over the top, but this is sort of minimally, perhaps formally, in my mind, triggers the conditions for a code of conduct procedure. I think that there are probably lessons to be drawn here, but I'm not even, I don't think I'd support even a formal warning or caution. I think people can sort of draw their lessons from this. In fact, we probably all can to a certain extent. However, I do think that there should be on record, however people vote, and I'll listen to arguments and opinions. Other people may have things to say. I do think we should be recording your opinions around this in a formal way. So I will move the motion. And I prefer the has versus the has not formulation for technical reasons with respect to my view of the charge put upon us by the Education Act and for other technical reasons. In any event, so I will move that Trustee Lyra Evans has breached blah, 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 blah. But I, at this point, very clearly intend to vote in the negative. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Trustee Blackburn, your hand is up. Are you planning to second? You're muted.
Yes, Madam Chair.
And did you wish to speak to the motion?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I trust all my colleagues would keep an open mind as we actually have the debate. Tonight, my colleagues, we are adjudicating a matter that will help set the parameters of what we believe to be acceptable comments in relation to the decisions we have made and to the debate and decisions we will make moving forward. The debate around the dedicated school resource officers at Gloucester and Ridgemont High Schools was heated and emotional. Despite what some may argue, there is no unanimity in any community, including racialized communities, about what the path forward should be. I believe that Trustee Evans' tweet about the board's decision in relation to the SROs at these two high schools is very problematic on many levels and does in fact breach our code of conduct. Trustee Evans states that the board decided to put, quote, extra police at Ridgemont and Gloucester. In fact, there is actually one dedicated officer at each school, and they are also responsible for the feeder schools. This has been the case for many years. Furthermore, in her comments to the investigator, she continued to use the term SRO in the plural. But the most problematic aspect of her tweet is when she suggests that her colleagues voting the way they did have upheld systemic racism. This is not an acceptable way for a trustee to characterize the vote of another. We can disagree, that is for certain, but that disagreement must always remain respectful and not inflammatory. Quoting from the investigator's interview with Trustee Evans on page 18, when the board decides to put extra police in schools, the board, even with the best of intentions, is enabling the school to prison pipeline to continue. Viewed in this light, the board's decision upholds systemic racism. There has been no data to suggest the above is true. In fact, many believe the opposite to be true. Remember, we are talking about our SRO program, not any other jurisdiction. The OCDSB's SRO program, as staff have repeatedly stated, is based on relationship building. Trustee Evans had an opportunity to reflect on what she said and frame it or express it in another way. She chose not to do this. Rather, she stuck to the narrative that her colleagues support systemic racism. She needs to be held accountable for this very intentionally narrow perspective that puts us all in a bad light. To push the notion that any trustee would purposely and deliberately vote to uphold systemic racism is simply not acceptable and should not be condoned in any way. The board is now in the process of reviewing the SRO program through a thorough consultation. People need to feel safe to freely express themselves and their views without the fear of being accused of supporting the oppression of anyone. In fact, the board heard from many different voices, including many from the very groups Trustee Evans claims to care about. I would like to thank Trustee Ellis for posting the community meeting he held with members of both the Ridgemont and Gloucester school communities. I watched the entire meeting, which spanned over 2 hours. There was much concern that a decision had been made with zero consultation. On August 31st, trustees received a letter from the chair and vice chair of Ridgemont School Council, and I quote in part, "These tweets, which are symptomatic of the language these trustees have used to communicate about our school, are not only harmful, but also incorrect. The SRO at Ridgemont has been financed by the board for years. There are no extra police. Furthermore," they state, "on a final note," and I'm quoting here, "on a final note, the continued references by these trustees to our school as marginalized, disproportionately racialized, and low income do not help our school community. While perhaps it helps advance the trustees' agendas, it is highly dismissive, particularly when the community is not even heard by the trustees, and the trustees do not represent the community. Colleagues, as trustees, we have an obligation to set the tone for a healthy and fulsome debate. I believe Trustee Evans has acted contrary to this objective, and finding that she has breached the code of conduct will hopefully encourage her to be more judicious with her words in the future and possibly keep an open mind about the issues she is responsible to make decisions on. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn.
Excuse me, Chair, point of order, and it has to do with the order of the, are we on the investigations investigator's report? I thought during that time we're limited to clarification on the report.
The report is appended. We are not having a separate presentation on the report at this point in time. We have a motion on the floor. If you have questions about the report, you may ask them. If you wish to simply enter the debate and not ask questions because you found you don't have questions about the report, then all you need to do is participate in the debate.
But I'm a little confused because this hasn't, I don't remember previous code of conduct. I thought we did the investigation, the report, and then we finished that and we went to voting on, and that's where we gave our positions. I'm also concerned that under rules of board, where we only have 5 minutes, I may have quite a few questions and use up my 5 minutes and then not have the opportunity to give context from my point of view.
Trustee Ellis, any trustee can move to adopt rules of committee. That's one thing. The decision was made that since this was a relatively straightforward report, we would simply append it to each of the 2 complaints on the assumption that trustees would be able to read it. And if they did have any questions, they would be able to raise those at the time of the debate. So did you wish?
Chair, I want to register my concern that wasn't adequately articulated prior to the meeting. But if those are the rules, those are the rules. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to the motion?
I guess I have a point.
Trustee Bell?
I would like to have legal opinion on what would be the grounds for recusing myself or a trustee during this this discussion.
I will ask Mr. Harnden if he would please respond to the question.
I'd be happy to. In fact, I was just drafting a note to you, Trustee Bell, to try to assist you with that decision. The principle that governs is whether there's a reasonable apprehension of bias. And what a trustee must ask himself or herself is whether or not they can approach the subject matter in an objective way. And secondarily, would they be perceived to be approaching the matter in an objective way? So you simply have to search your own mind. Is there anything that would cause me to approach this subject matter with a bias toward one conclusion or another? And I can't really assist you any further. You just have to pose those questions to yourself and decide what is appropriate.
And if I don't recuse myself, then what? And there's found to be a violation, then what happens?
Mr. Harnden?
Or perceived?
Yes, it is conceivable that if there was litigation following the resolution of the board and perhaps the imposition of a sanction of some nature, that an allegation would be made that the board's decision was affected by the participation of a trustee who clearly was perceived to have a bias toward a particular conclusion. And the court would determine whether or not that allegation was well-founded or not.
And does this apply to asking of questions at this moment in addition, or is it separate from voting on the matter?
I think the best judgment would be if the trustee felt that there were circumstances that would cause herself to conclude that she should recuse herself, it would be inappropriate to then participate in the meeting, even by asking clarification questions, because once there's a decision that there is a bias or a reasonable apprehension of bias, then any participation would be regarded as influencing the eventual outcome of the meeting.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And so if I was to recuse myself from voting on this matter, when would I have to do that?
I would say it's appropriate at the present time because the board is in the course of deliberating on the matter.
Well, I think it's quite obvious where I stand on this matter, and so I think any question that I would pose or how I would be voting on this would be perceived as biased. It would be biased. It's pretty obvious. I made a tweet about it and didn't take that down. So I am going to recuse myself from this conversation because I will always abide by the code of conduct. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Bell, for letting us know your decision.
Point of order, Chair.
Trustee Ellis.
Yes, this is the first time that we've had sort of code of conducts. I'd be interested to hear if there's been a legal opinion on what happens, because only by the grace of God, because I don't use my Twitter account anymore, am I not named on this? Because if I had, I probably would have retweeted. So, that would have been 3 trustees in the same situation as we find these 2 trustees. So not only for this specific issue, but in going forward, this limitation on the code of conduct where linked, I could see you could bring a code of conduct against 9 trustees, which would leave, 3 trustees to make the decision, one being the person bringing the complaint. I'd like a legal opinion on how this might all play out.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. I'm going to assume that is part of your speaking time on this issue. I will go to Mr. Harnden.
No, I don't think you can make that assumption. This is a point of order. We have a unique situation here and a change in the rules. I'm quite concerned about how cavalier this is going through. We've asked for a legal opinion. I asked for it on Friday, and just given vague answers, I'd like some more. I'd appreciate some specifics around the serious questions that I'm asking on this process.
Mr. Harnden.
Trustee Ellis, you have identified a legitimate concern regarding the fact that the code of conduct prescribes a number of trustees that have to vote in support of a particular decision involving the code. And it could conceivably occur that there would be insufficient trustees who hadn't recused themselves by reason of their involvement, that there would not be the requisite number of trustees left to make the motion. That's a flaw in the code of conduct that might well be addressed in a rewriting of it. I think there was a policy reason behind it. There was a wish on the part of the board that there wouldn't be a finding of a violation without a solid number of trustees in support of it. But there is a practical problem that's disclosed by the events this evening. And as you point out, it could be more problematic going forward.
Anything further, Trustee Ellis?
No, I'm fine with my points of order. Thank you.
Student Trustee Liu.
I just wanted to take a moment to point out something, or at least my opinion on this matter. I don't think that accusations of systemic racism are the same thing necessarily or are really comparable to like a malicious personal attack, which I think the breach of the code of conduct is supposed to, be. I think that the tweet that Trustee Lyra posted criticizes a professional decision, and I think that constitutes like professional criticism and not necessarily malicious, like a malicious personal attack that would share the quality of a breach of code of conduct. And I do additionally think that perhaps like sanctioning a trustee for accusing the board of like systemic racism could also set a really bad precedent for, you know, future trustees who may want to, you know, speak out on issues of, you know, like systemic racism or systemic oppression or anything like that. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents here. Yeah.
Thank you, student trustee Liu. Are there any other speakers to the recommendation? If there are none, before I go to trustee Campbell for wrap up, I will ask trustee Penny, the vice chair, if he would please take the chair for a moment.
All right, Madam Chair, I assume you wish to speak, so go ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I do think that the tweet in question was problematic in that it mischaracterized a decision of the board. I can't speculate as to motivation. It could have been inadvertent. It could have been deliberate. I really don't know. And the investigator's report doesn't give me any indication of that. However, the bottom line is that in reading the words in the tweet, I do see it as misrepresenting the decision of the board. I understand that tweets are limited in how much you can put in there. So it is difficult to provide context, but I do think it could have been phrased differently and more accurately. In terms of the breaches of the code, however, I am not sure that section 3.18 of the code has been breached, and I would therefore like to move to delete the reference to 3.18 from the recommendation that's before us.
Thank you for very much. So you've amended the motion to delete section 318, Chair Scott?
Yes, that's my amendment, if there's a seconder.
Do we have a second for Trustee Scott's amendment? Trustee Boothby? Thank you very much. And does that serve as your introduction, Trustee?
It does.
And is there any
point of order, Chair? Does this
yes, Trustee Ellis?
does this need to go to the two-thirds majority, two-thirds as well, or is this for an amendment? Is that a simple majority?
I will refer that question to Executive Officer Giroux.
An amendment to the motion is just a simple majority. It's only a decision with respect to a breach of the code that requires a 2/3 majority.
Quite a follow-up question on that then we could amend this into meaninglessness with simply a majority?
You have the discretion to make amendments to the motion as you see fit. The regular procedural rules apply, so you can't, by way of amendment, controvert the motion to the opposite of where it started, but otherwise you can amend it as long as you have a majority vote to support it.
But one could keep amending until it was a poison pill kind of thing. Sorry, that's rhetorical.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. As Executive Officer says, it is not generally allowed to amend a motion so that it's the contra of what is originally intended. So, but it is allowed to amend a motion. And right now we have a motion, or sorry, we have an amendment to delete section, the reference to section 3.18. And is there any debate on this? And I'm seeing no trustees raise their hands, and therefore I'm going to send it back to Trustee Scott for wrap up of that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No wrap up required.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to, and on this amendment, I'd like to call the question on it. And as Executive Officer Drew has noted, it's a simple majority. And I see that we have I think we have 9 trustees present, maybe 10, 9 who can vote. So all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hands. And opposed? And that passes. Oh, any abstentions? And that motion passes. And is that everything that you have, Trustee Scott?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And back to you, Trustee Scott.
And so since there are other speakers to the motion on the list, I will go back to Trustee Campbell for wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, I believe, as you suggested yourself, I don't want to twist your words on you. I think it was unfortunate. I would not have characterized the board's decision in the way it was done or described, but I believe I understand the perspective and believe that was honestly arrived at. Again, fundamentally, I believe that this is a communications issue, and perhaps there was a lack of care, perhaps, in terms of how statements could have been interpreted outside of one's own perspective on the matter. So again, I think this is a communications issue, and there are lessons learned here, but this really does not rise to the level of sanction in a formal proceeding. That's my view. Thank you.
And just to remind trustees, we are not voting on whether or not to apply a sanction at this stage. All we are deciding is whether or not there was a breach of the code of conduct. If there was, we will decide separately on whether or not any sanctions should be imposed, and if so, what those would be.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the correction. I should have said rise to the level of formal breach consideration process. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will call the question. This will be a recorded vote. We do need 2/3, which would be 8 trustees voting in favor in order to approve the motion to determine that there was a breach. So I will ask Manager Guthrie if she would please conduct the recorded vote.
Trustee Boothby,
Opposed.
Trustee Blackburn,
In favor?
Trustee Huff,
Opposed.
Trustee Campbell,
Opposed.
Trustee Ellis,
Opposed.
Trustee Jennings,
Opposed.
Trustee Penny,
Abstain?
Trustee Fisher,
Opposed.
Trustee Scott,
Abstain.
that's 6 opposed, 2 abstentions, 1 in favor.
And so the motion that there was a breach of the code of conduct fails. And with that, we move on to the next item because we will not need to consider whether or not there's sanctions since we did not determine that there was a breach. So this brings us to report 20-100, Code of Conduct Breach Determination, Justine Bell. And I will look again to the director to introduce the report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I would ask Executive Officer Giroux again to review the nature of the report and indicate what the next steps are.
So thank you, Madam Director. Much in the same way as the first case, you have before you a report regarding an allegation of a breach of the Code of Conduct by Trustee Justine Bell. It is like the other reported on in the investigator's report, which is in your package, and the investigator is present to answer any questions that you might have. And again, the decision that the board has before it is whether or not there has been a breach of the Code of Conduct. And both legal counsel and the investigator are here to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer Giroux. And I have Trustee Lyra first.
I'm going to have to recuse myself from this discussion.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lyra. And I have Trustee Campbell next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move the motion that Trustee Bell has, etc.
And so that is with regard to all of the sections of the Code of Conduct.
Yep.
That are referenced. Thank you.
And just a brief intro for my money. The situation with respect to Trustee Bell is even clearer and less problematic in that it's in the report, became aware or developed an awareness that her perspective could be misinterpreted and sought to follow up with some basically softening follow-up or damage control to make sure that her perspective was fully communicated to different audiences, which may not share the special knowledge or perspectives that she shared with other trustees. So to me, this is an even less problematic question, and I'll be voting against the motion I moved and urge my colleagues to do similarly. Thank you.
And we need a seconder for the motion. Trustee Boothby, you're seconding?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the recommendation? Trustee Boothby?
Sorry, left my hand up.
Okay, Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So it's obvious to me what the outcome of this vote will be. I just want to publicly address Trustee Bell's assertion that I filed this complaint in a vexatious way and that I brought it in bad faith. As I indicated in my response to Mr. Tremaine, that wasn't in fact the case, and my preference would have been that this portion be handled informally. I did not take what Trustee Bell had to say about me in the past personally whatsoever. In fact, I've only ever met Trustee Bell once. She does not know me. I do not know her. So comments that people make about me that do not know me do not hurt me. And so I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Trustee Ellis.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for the investigator. I'm wondering if he took a look at whether there had been the history of vexatious code of conduct at the board here.
And I will ask Mr. Tremaine, thank you very much for attending tonight. If he would please respond.
Thank you for the question. So that, just in terms of the process, the suggestion that the complaint was frivolous, vexatious, made in bad faith was raised by Trustee Bell, and then I gave Trustee Blackburn an opportunity to respond to that, which is in the report. As I read the code of conduct, at the initial screening phase, let's call it that, when a complaint is when the chair and vice chair are made aware of a complaint, there's an initial decision that's made, and one of the considerations is whether the complaint is frivolous, vexatious, or made in bad faith. And one of the outcomes of that is, if it is, then it isn't sent to a formal investigation. So there's sort of a triage initially. So having raised that sort of after the formal investigation had been started, was, I guess, worthy of consideration. And I certainly put all of the parties' views back and forth in the report. But in terms of whether or not, as sort of a threshold issue, it ends the complaint, really, that would have been a decision that would have been made before the formal investigation was started.
Trustee Ellis?
Well, this is supposed to be a finding of fact, and there's a whole lot of facts that haven't been found here. The allegations of that the SRO program is not systemic racism, and I tell you, this vexatious one is because, yeah, I won't go down there because I know that is in conflict with our code of conduct. Speaking of past code of conducts, I just want to say that I hope we as a board, we really need to reconsider this. The investigations that we've had, this one bears out as some of the other ones. It's not a finding of fact. It's simply taking interviews. And I think I don't know why we as a board are spending money just to get statements from in this case, from 3 trustees. I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. Do we have any other speakers to the motion? And I'm seeing none, so I'll go back to Campbell for wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I've indicated my direction here. I do agree it's a bit outside the scope of this proceeding, perhaps, but I do agree that we should be looking at our code of conduct policy. Last time we engaged in a more lengthy process invoking the code of conduct some weeks ago. I took some notes about possible improvements we could make, and I do think we once, we're maybe in the new year when we have some cycles, it would be another policy that we should, because we have recent lessons learned and perspectives, and while things are still relatively fresh in our minds, it would be worthwhile perhaps reviewing things. In any event, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. And that then brings us to the vote, and I will ask Manager Guthrie if she could please conduct the vote.
Trustee Boothby.
Opposed.
Trustee Blackburn.
In favor.
Trustee Huff.
Opposed.
Trustee Campbell.
Opposed.
Trustee Ellis.
Opposed.
Trustee Jennings.
Opposed.
Trustee Penny.
Opposed.
Trustee Fisher.
Opposed.
Trustee Scott.
Opposed.
That is 8 opposed, 1 in favor.
And the motion fails with regard to finding a breach, and that renders the following report, follow the next item on our agenda around the possible application of sanctions moot. So with that, if I can get back to the right place here, I believe we have reached the end of our agenda for this meeting. Before I adjourn the meeting, I will, however, remind trustees that we are still in the process of engaging a commissioner, an integrity commissioner. And the expectation is that we will be reviewing the code of conduct policy at that time, because there will undoubtedly be some changes that we may be wishing to make. And with that, I believe that we can adjourn the meeting, having completed our agenda.